Yo, what is up guys, Ghost here, and welcome back to another video. Today we have all of the important patch notes that are coming in update 5.3 next Tuesday. This is going to be a fairly lengthy video. There's a lot of important stuff in this update to go over. Probably the biggest rebalancing of vehicles in the game, some important engineer changes, attack helicopter changes, a lot of cool stuff. So strap yourselves in guys, get yourself a nice drink, a cup of tea, whatever you like, and let's get started on this. I will do my best to timestamp this for you in the description of the video, so if you're just, interested in the vehicle changes or the engineer changes or whatever it is, feel free to skip along the video because, yeah, like I said, it's going to be a long one. As always though, before we do begin, if you guys do enjoy the content here on the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you guys so much for your support as always. I'm sure we'll be at 48k in no time. Okay, so first of all, we've got Battlefield Redux coming. I'm not going to spend any time talking about this. You guys have already heard about it. I've covered this in multiple videos. That's coming. We all know about it. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Then we've got the Codex. Now, the Codex is apparently a feature, and it's going to be what they call their one-stop shop for all things narrative in the world of Battlefield 2042. So you will be able to access this by going to Profile, and then a new section there called the Codex. And it's going to have all of the Battlefield 2042 narrative things, all of the lore, things about factions, maps, specialists, themed events, you name it. If that's something that you're interested in, you're going to be able to read it in there. It's going to have all of the events up to Season 4 11th hour to begin with, and then further updates to the Codex will follow alongside the release of Season 6 in October. Okay, let's dig into the massive vehicle rebalance that's going on here. So they say here that vehicles are an inherent part of the chaotic and immersive gameplay that we want you to experience with Battlefield. As we've now concluded reworking all the all-out warfare launch maps, our focus shifts to how vehicles interact with these reworked locations. So scheduled for the week following update 5.2, so this is not coming next week, but apparently the week after that, a server-side change will overhaul the vehicle counts for Conquest on the all-out warfare era maps. Areas we reviewed when deciding on improved vehicle counts per map are, for example, the locations, their fantasy and conflict, and the player counts. So apparently the first update to vehicle counts is going to be for the all-out warfare maps, and then vehicle counts on Battlefield Portal maps will be reviewed in a later update, so don't expect any changes to those ones just yet. But here are a couple of examples that they've given us. So first of all, for exposure, they say exposure offers a significant amount of verticality due to its mountainous region, while also providing much needed respite for infantry through its tunnel system and interior layouts. So air vehicles are now going to be the new focus of exposure. And here you can see on 128 players, the major changes here is that armored transports have gone down from 1 to 0, attack helicopters have been increased from 1 to 3, and there is now going to be 2 jets instead of 1. And then there's also an overall decrease in the amount of civilian vehicles and 1 less utility vehicle. So I think that does make a lot of sense. The armored vehicles on exposure have never really properly been able to traverse between the upper cliffside of the map and the lower ravine. There is an elevator that you can use for vehicles, but there are very few people who actually bother to do that. So I definitely agree with the theme that they're taking here, having air vehicles be front and center. Now, if we move on to another map here, it says discarded is instead an example of catering towards ground combat focus. Aircraft will be part of its gameplay, but the majority of combat will be between colliding infantry and ground forces. So here they've increased the amount of armoured transports from 1 to 2, and this is for 128 players. They've reduced light armour from 2 to 1, increased heavy armour from 2 to 3, attack helicopters remain the same, there's going to be 1 extra jet, and then you've got a few less civilian and utility vehicles. So you can see that they've made a few tweaks to make the armor on the ground a little bit more prominent. So I think this is a really good idea. I have been pioneering and hoping that DICE would go back to balancing the vehicle numbers on a map-by-map basis. That has always been the system that has worked the best. I did hope for a little bit more specialization, like I really enjoyed in some of the Battlefield 4 maps where there were some vehicle categories that just weren't available at all. Like, for example, if you're playing on Flood Zone, there is just, no attack helicopter. There is no jet. now the king of the sky is the scout helicopter. However, I can also appreciate that maybe, you know, due to the fact that the player numbers are a little bit higher now in Battlefield 2042, perhaps they can't just go getting rid entirely of too many vehicle categories. Now, next we are going to move on to the massive helicopter overhaul here, and this is going to have a special focus on the attack helicopters. So here's a note from the vehicles team. They say, we wanted to take a quick moment to discuss some of the changes taking place with vehicles in this game update. We have seen attack helicopters not performing as well as we would like them to, especially in comparison with vehicles such as the Nightbird and the stealth helicopters in terms of dealing and receiving damage. So the changes we're making are as follows. Currently, the gameplay, armor and health difference between attack helis and their lighter variants are not noticeably felt, and they equally struggle against anti-air weaponry. So to address this, we are lowering the damage that attack helicopters take from 30mm cannons on the Wildcat and flak weapon explosions by 25%, which will help with better survivability versus their lighter counterparts. So I do think that makes sense. Attack helicopters definitely are the easiest helicopter in the game, in my opinion, to sort of snipe out of the sky. You know, they are a little bit more tanky, but they definitely needed a little bit of help here, and it looks like they're getting it, especially against the Wildcats. And then they continue here saying, we're also changing how damage is dealt to other ground vehicles when using anti-vehicle missiles. So these missiles will now deal damage primarily through their blast to ensure that they're more effective as an anti-vehicle option. So with this change, it's vital that you aim for direct hits to ensure full damage output. And these changes affect all air vehicles that use anti-vehicle missiles. So I assume that applies to like the jet rocket pods and stuff. Now, moving on, they've also made some big improvements to the gunner seat. So they say we've also realigned the weapon and camera positioning of the front gunner. With a wider and better view, this now helps you understand the heading of the helicopter as you traverse across the battlefield. We're also increasing the weapon efficiency of the gunner position through a series of balance changes and the addition of thermal optics. So thermal optics will come at the cost of your ability to zoom, so it's up to you if you decide if the pros outweigh the cons. So that right there is absolutely huge, and we're going to get to the nitty-gritty of those changes in a minute. In this update, you'll also notice that we've slightly lowered the sensitivity of all helicopters. This is to allow for easier target acquisition while giving micro inputs to adjust your aim during those chaotic moments. And then in addition to that, they've also got some changes to the hovercraft. So they say we're also improving the handling of ground vehicles, and we'll be starting off with the hovercraft by changing how force is applied with this vehicle, as we've heard from you that it has too much drift. We've increased the input response of the hovercraft, and you should feel it now accelerates and halts faster than before. It will also feel a lot less drifty, alongside the addition of yaw acceleration to help rotate from a standstill position. So that's really good to hear. The hovercraft, you know, has always been, yeah, in my opinion, way too drifty. Give me an LATV for any day of the week. But it's really great to hear that this is apparently just the start of the changes to ground vehicles. So the tanks, the Wildcats, all of the armor on the ground should see some good changes in the future as well. Now, they've also addressed the flak cannons in the game. So they say we've received a lot of flak for it, so let's also discuss the flak cannons. In one of our previous updates, we've temporarily disabled the flak cannon for the LETV4 and the hovercraft because an issue allowed the flak cannon to use the vehicle blast values when it explodes on timeout, and people were using this to, like, you know, abuse infantry on breakthrough. So in this update, we're re-enabling the flak cannon, but we're removing their damage against infantry as we felt it was too powerful, alongside adding to the prevalence of explosions. So I definitely agree with that one there. It's also just a clear message to players when they try to shoot infantry players with the flak cannon that this is not an anti-infantry weapon. Okay, so that's the main meat of the changes, and now we're going to get into all of the exact numbers and just, you know, exactly what has been changed here. So first of all, Crawford has seen a little bit of a buff, a long time coming, I think. So they've increased the minimum damage of his Vulcan's bullets from 11 to 12, and they've also increased the accuracy of the mounted Vulcan cannon after it's been firing for a small period of time. Now, this is a big one, and you guys are not going to be happy with DICE or with me, I don't think. So I thought this was going to be an engineer buff. Turns out I was wrong, so you can go ahead and sue me now. So they've actually reduced the speed at which the RPG and the recoilless M5 projectile travels at by 17%. And in the dev comment here, they say that we saw that players were using the rocket launchers primarily for anti-infantry use and sniping vehicles with ease at range. Thus, we want to make this a bit more of a skill shot to perform at a long distance. And then another small change here is that they've increased the weapon sway on the recoilless M5 while aiming down sights. And again here the dev comment says that this should mostly impact targeting of infantry, where we found players were using the recoilless M5 to snipe infantry at distance, as opposed to having it be used against its intended use case, which is vehicles and structures. I do agree with these changes. I've always felt that the projectiles in Battlefield 2042 for the engineer class, you know, they just fly way too fast when you compare them to previous games, and it's just so easy to snipe, you know, helicopters out of the sky, tanks off in the distance. I know a lot of people are not going to like this, but I honestly expected some other changes to come in alongside this, maybe an increase to the engineer ammo counts. That appears to not be the case. So the other day when I said that this would be a buff in my video, I was honestly like 100% sure it was going to be a buff, because most of the feedback that I see from players is that the engineer class is too weak. Engineers need a buff. And then Bruce Brody's comment on the Inside Battlefield podcast, where he was saying that we wanted to make engineers more fun and, you know, a better experience for people. It just sounded like it was going to be a buff. So I'm sorry if I got somebody's hopes up there, but apparently this is a nerf. Not a massive nerf, but, you know, a little tweak. Okay, let's move on to the small details about the vehicle changes. So for all the helicopters, they've added a thermal option to the helicopter gunner seat. So I assume this goes for, of course, the attack helicopters, but also the stealth helicopter gunner seats. They've then lowered the yaw sensitivity of all the helicopters slightly, and that should now be easier for target acquisition and controlling of the vehicle. So before they said they lowered the sensitivity, it seems to just be on the yaw axis and not on the pitch axis there. And then they've also made improvements to the Nightbird first perspective crosshair position. Now this could be actually potentially quite big for Nightbird pilots, because if you're a Nightbird player, you'll know that you have a feeling for where your minigun shots are going to land in comparison to where that crosshair is on the screen. So if they've now gone ahead and changed the perspective of where the crosshair is on the screen, that could, you know, certainly take some getting used to. Now for the attack helicopters themselves, we also have a lot of changes here. So they've increased the amount of tow ammo you can carry by 1. The attack helicopter gunner aiming constraints have been reduced by increasing the minimum and maximum degree in pitch the player can now move the gun. And also the third person camera positions have been adjusted to keep the vehicle more centered and aligned to the crosshair. So for anybody who's ever gunned in the attack helicopter, you'll know that the camera wasn't exactly great, especially if you were trying to help your pilot shoot at an enemy helicopter. It was kind of all over the place, and most of what you could see was like your own helicopter really. But it seems they've also made some really big changes to how the gun works. So they've increased the gunner rate from 200 to 600. So that means the gun is now going to fire 3 times as fast as it previously was. However, they have lowered the gunner blast damage from 20 to 18, and they've lowered the starting damage from 40 to 25. They've also made some overheat adjustments to meet the new characteristics, and the gunner speed has been reduced from 800 to 350. So gunner speed, I assume what they're talking about here is how quickly you can move around the gunner turret. They've reduced the damage attack helicopters take from the AA of the Wildcat and flak explosions by 25%, as previously mentioned. They've also updated the drag forces for better hover control and maneuverability. And then they've also made some adjustments here, basically to make the Super Hokum and the Apache Warchief as similar in handling to each other as possible. Now, the jets have also seen a couple of changes, so they've actually lowered the rate of fire of the jet rocket pods from 300 to 240. I'm not sure I really agree with that change. I feel like the rocket pods aren't used a whole lot, and they're honestly not that great. Most decent pilots don't take the rocket pods, so, you know, a nerf to the rate of fire there isn't going to do any favors of people picking those. But they've also lowered the pitch stickiness of jets, so you should feel that there is noticeably less weight after pitching up or down. Let us know your feedback after trying it out. So hopefully this is going to make pulling up out of a strafe or getting down into a strafe a little bit easier. And then finally here for the hovercraft, they have increased the acceleration responsiveness of the hovercraft, and it should feel snappier when you give forward input and when attempting to steer. And they've also changed around the turn forces, and in general here it says this makes the hovercraft turn more like a car and increases the driver control of this vehicle. Whew. So I know guys, that was a lot of changes to get through. Really interesting stuff though. I thoroughly expected the engineers to be getting a buff. That turns out to not be the case. That doesn't mean that they won't give them some sort of a tweak in the engineer's favor in the future if things feel a little bit off balance, especially with the fact that we're now getting even more vehicles, right? So it looks like in a lot of maps you're going to be seeing even more tanks, for example. Unfortunately, we didn't see any kind of rework mentioned here for the attack helicopter UI or the heads-up display. That would have been really nice to see a predicted impact point for the missiles that the pilot can use there, and also some feedback, some information on where your gunner is facing. That's been in all of the past Battlefield games that have had attack helicopters with gunner seats in them. So I'm kind of bummed out that that's not coming. Maybe it's coming in a future patch though, maybe that's part of the plan, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see on that front. Guys, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, give yourself a pat on the back. If you did enjoy the video, leave me a like down below. That's always appreciated. Subscribe for more Battlefield content, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.